Okay.
Woo!
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, everyone.
Okay, so welcome to the Black British Aces panel. We're waiting on one more person, and they'll add them as soon as they get here. Um, my name is Kim, as you all know, or the Asexual Goddess by my YouTube channel. And since we're waiting, um, did you guys want to introduce yourself? I'm sorry.
Uh, yeah, I guess I'll start. For those who don't know, I'm Yasin Benoit. I'm a British model, aromantic, asexuality activist, writer, speaker, researcher, and project consultant.
Hi, all. I'm Melissa. I've been living in the UK for about almost 10 years now. I'm originally from Bermuda, and I teach early years, and I'm asexual, aromantic.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, so did y'all want to get started with a few questions? Or...
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
go.
yeah, I
Oh,
think we should.
perfect. Okay, so the first question I have is in links to being your gender and your asexuality. So how do those two things intersect or link for you personally?
Shall I go first, or Melissa, do you want to
Yep,
go
good.
first? Okay. I mean, I feel like for me, like I'm not one of those people that has like personally like puts a lot of emphasis on my gender. Like I'm cisgender, but like it's not something like that I really like incorporate into my daily thinking that much. I think the main way that it's sort of intersected with my experience is more on how your gender influences other people's perceptions of you and your sexuality rather than how it's impacted like my own understanding of my sexuality. Um, because not just your gender, but also your race as a Black woman were one of the most like hypersexualized demographics in the world. And so I know that that has an impact on people understanding my asexuality, whether or not they believe that I'm asexual. And in a way that I think it kind of doesn't for, if I was like a Black man, I think it kind of has like, it adds a sort of element of danger and like provocativeness to it that kind of leads to reactions that are a bit more like sexually aggressive, as though you're like depriving people of something that they should be entitled to because they're kind of used to Black women being at least presented as being continuously available, like the whole Jezebel stereotype. So I think in that way it kind of definitely impacts the experience, but in terms of my own personal understanding, it doesn't really make a difference in like that sense.
Hmm. We're being joined by Sade. Did you want to introduce yourself before we continue into the question?
Uh, Hello, um, my name's Sade. I'm 24. I'm from East London, and my pronouns, as you can see, are she, her.
Perfect, perfect. So I was just asking Melissa and Yasmin, how gender intersects with their identity. So anybody want to go next?
Yeah. Um, so for apologize if my sound is weird. I've just lost my headphones. So for me personally, I'm definitely cis, but I did have a time going through deciding kind of, how I felt about things because I do suffer a bit of dysmorphia, but for me, I feel that's more because I'm a bit face blind. And so for me, seeing my face is a bit like, I don't know. But I've, for me, asexuality has, as far as gender goes, hasn't really affected me much. Um, yeah.
Okay, let's see. And Sade, did you want to say anything about that? Yeah.
Oh, I should go next.
Yeah.
If you want, I could go. It doesn't. It doesn't matter.
Sorry, this is my first panel, so
Oh
um,
no, it's perfectly fine. I could go first. It's fine. I guess for me personally, it's kind of a bit of both. I would say because being somebody that's also a gender, I don't really think too much about my gender unless it's in the lens of being black. So like a lot of my experiences are connected to black women simply because that's the viewpoint that I've always grew up around, and like I understand every single like issue within the black community through being a black woman. But outside of that, like being a woman isn't like that, I'm not that connected to the experience outside of being black. So that's kind of my experience with it, I guess. Yeah.
Um, so I'll go next.
Yes.
Uh, I think uh, I think one thing that comes to mind specifically for me is um, when I went through puberty at like 11, and so my body was changing, and that was scary and weird because I grew up in a really sheltered household and that I couldn't really talk to anyone or like another woman about how I felt within my body, and even then, I'm not sure if that would have helped. But I think that the way that maybe it intersected with me being asexual a little bit was maybe, I think, being very young and my sort of earliest sort of visual references of black female sexuality being connected to like video vixens specifically, and um, that just being interesting because it was probably like a very prominent but also very narrow definition of what black female sexuality looked like to me at the time. And because I saw my body changing, I was like, I think there was a fear of being like, if my body looks more like those women's bodies, then I'm going to be sexualized, and that to me was something I was fearful of, maybe because I was asexual, and then also because there weren't any adults around to explain to me that women's bodies being sexualized is sometimes not always their own choice. And then if you're underage, there's also that gray area of, well, if someone does sexualize you, then that's not okay. And just not having any of those reference points made it confusing. And so there was a fearfulness about my body changing and me sort of also knowing at that age that I'm asexual. So like I don't want to be responded to in a certain way because of that. And that also sort of intersected with me being sort of like a tomboy growing up. And me also, I think to this day, just presenting in ways that aren't always very feminine, but also sometimes wanting to present as more feminine, and just knowing now as an older person that it's sort of up to you, um, how you want to present, and it's not up to everybody else to receive you in a certain way for you to feel comfortable, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does.
Oh yeah, I definitely can agree with that. I was a huge tomboy growing up, and I'm still, very you know, I just like to be comfortable, But at the same time, I do a lot of cosplay, and so when I do cosplay, I don't mind uh, change. I don't mind presenting as male when I'm cosplay or presenting as female. Um, and weirdly, that's for me when I feel most comfortable with myself is when I'm in cosplay, So it is really your decision how you present, regardless of your race. But I feel sometimes as Black people, we're kind of held a bit, in a bit more narrow view. Sometimes, especially when it comes to cosplaying, because, you know, like, asexuality, a lot of times it is majority white, you know. So it's been pretty much my whole life being the one Black person.
Definitely, I definitely feel you there. Like almost in any space you go, if you like something that's outside of the like, space, the norm for blackness, you will be like singled out and like Because I also like rock music and stuff, so it's hard to find other people who like those things.
Mhm.
And so, like, imagine being like black and ace in these spaces is like 10 times like harder, because it's like this isn't something that's widely talked about and known about, So
Mhm.
yeah,
I mean,
but
I felt like it was quite helpful. By the time it came to navigating A spaces, I was like, I've already stood out my entire life. This is nothing. So
Yep.
even realizing I was asexual, I'm like, and what? Like after on top of everything else, I'm like, sure, why not? Like I feel like it sort of helped me develop quite a thick skin and be used to standing out and doing my own thing.
Mhm.
So in terms of like, I wasn't worried about how people would perceive me or whether people would think I was weird. It's like I'm already weird. So it's fine.
that is true. Yes.
Just add it to the list.
Yeah. I was like, oh no, people are gonna think I'm unusual. Like they already do. This isn't news. So I think it was quite helpful in that sense.
Okay. Yeah. And I wanted to trail back to what Sade was saying about I think you mentioned like your background briefly, and I know a couple of you are from like you have family that are Caribbean, and so I wanted to talk about that because that's a topic we don't talk about a lot in Black spaces, and I want to see how it differs. So if you all wanted to speak on that.
Mhm. Well, like I said, I grew up in Bermuda.
Mhm.
So, coming from that part of the diaspora, my mother's also Jamaican. Um, and I've actually found it a lot easier being asexual here in the UK. I actually didn't come across asexuality until I moved to the UK. Um, Back home. And one of the reasons that, I enjoy being in the UK is that I don't get all of the rumors and things that I got growing up, um, because there's still, some issues with, um, LGBT issues. Bermuda is currently struggling just with same-sex marriage, which was legalized for a minute and then struck down. Um, and so for me, it's my parents are very my parents are accepting my mom to a point. Um, the part where she has trouble is the fact that yes, I'm asexual, but I identify as LGBTQIA, and she, being very church, is very, oh, you're not gonna get involved with those people, are you? And you don't believe in all this, do you? I said, well, yes, I do, you know, but, and also that was something that I had to kind of come to terms with when I came out as asexual. I was like, okay, but do I really belong, uh, in that community? Um, and just growing up in church, that was a lot of things that I had to kind of wrestle with. Um, so I think with coming from the Caribbean background is because it is very religious. Um, there is that struggle, but it was for me it was easier because I've had aunts and things who have not married and have not had children for different reasons and things, so it wasn't a huge shock in my family that um, I'm not married or and don't and don't really care about getting married and things. So that's you know and plus my brother has a child now, so now the pressure's off me. I'm okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think similarly for me, I'm Trinidadian, Jamaican, and Bajan, and I think that within West Indian culture, whether you're like in the country or as part of the diaspora, it's sort of we are quite conservative, and so I think that was almost beneficial in some ways because the manifestation of asexuality most of the time is, not really being very sexually active in a lot of people's cases. And so, as a sort of teenage girl who expressed a lack of interest in my case, being aromantic as well, dating and having sex, it really wasn't that much of a big deal. If anything, I think people were quite cool with that because it was perceived as me being like well behaved. And not being fast and just, focusing on my school. So, and the kind of long list of things that you're worried about your teenage daughter being asexual probably wasn't at like the top of them. But similarly to what Melissa mentioned, I think that the only bit of tension really comes from realizing that it isn't just a manifestation of me being well behaved. It's actually a sexual orientation, which means that I'm not straight, and that makes me pretty queer, and that is part of the LGBTQIA plus community. And I think that has kind of been the only part that some people have found kind of contentious, because, not necessarily because of asexuality, but just because they kind of fundamentally disagree with any aspects of queerness or any aspects of that community. But also, I think I've been personally quite lucky because of my work. There are different aspects of my life that are associated with success, and therefore I think people are less inclined to be mad about what I'm doing because they see it going well and they see it looking interesting. So they can't be mad at me being asexual if it leads me to doing things that are perceived as like, glamorous or interesting. And I do wonder whether people would be as accepting if I wasn't, in the line of work that I'm in now. But yeah, I definitely think that kind of helped. And at this current point, I think that most people in my family are either accepting of it, curious, but don't want to ask about it because, you don't really ask your younger relatives about their sexual habits, or they're or yeah, I think that's kind of like the main things, or they don't really get it, but they're not really gonna ask, or they're just like not really um that interested. So I think it's been quite lucky in that sense.
Yeah.
Should I go next? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Um, so the question was about what our backgrounds.
Yeah. So Caribbean or just, black in general, any background. Yeah.
Oh, um, so my mother and father, they're West African. So my father's Nigerian, my mother's Ghanaian. Um, no. Um, so a bit of background about me is that um, I think growing up in their household, I think sort of anything revolving around sexuality was either taboo or demonized. And I mean, it was made very clear to me at quite early on that um, it being gay or trans is kind of like a no go zone. Um, so they don't know. But then the other thing about that is that I went into foster care at 16. So um, I'm actually not in contact with them. I am in contact with my foster mom, who is a Caribbean woman, and uh, again, being gay, LGBT is a no for her as well, because she's a religious. And I'm respectful of that. Um, and then the thing with her is that I actually came out to her as bisexual, because that was what the label that I was using at the time. Um, because I do identify as biromantic as well. So it's like, I guess, half accurate if you want to say that. But uh, that part of me is, I think, is still sort of like ignored when it comes to her. And with the asexual thing, I've never brought it up because I it's never felt important to bring up. And then I think part of that is also compounded by this sort of growing up and knowing that sexuality was sort of heavily demonized, especially like hyper feminine displays of sexuality, and being told that from a young age, and then coming into my foster mom's household and um, sort of having very similar sentiments reflected towards me in a way. Um, and sorry, I promise I'm going somewhere with this. Uh, I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Um, I think I had this sort of weird point of contention because I did join a church at 16, and then again I'm being there's other messages of very anti-LGBT, anti uh, outward displays of sexuality in any way, sort of messages being relayed to me, and I think it resulted in this point in time that I can remember specifically where I think anything involving just mild conversations about sex or sexuality was taboo or like I had like a very disapproving attitude towards it, and it's because of how I grew up. And then the more I started to demonize sexuality less, the more I was sort of made to understood that at some point in time before I realized I was asexual, I think I was sort of on this like the sort of holier than thou moral high ground of like everybody's complaining about like how it's so difficult to be celibate, and I'm like I'm over here like what is the problem, guys? Like this is easy. What? And then I'm like, oh no, but you're asexual. I'm like, oh, that explains it. And so now I'm like, I I've never seen like explicit messaging like within the churches that I've been at that were anti asexual, but then again, I was going through that period of time where I was like, I was made to feel like being asexual was kind of this virtue type thing. And the more I began to unravel it, the more I was like, well, human sexuality is actually quite complex, and I don't want to sit on this moral soapbox anymore of I'm better than you because I don't experience like sexual attraction or because I don't, that thing. And then um, I think again it's being in those spaces because of either cultural or religious reasons, and seeing how the LGBT plus community as a whole are just kind of demonized, and that being difficult to contend with. But um, I think when it comes to my foster family, I just never brought it up, and I don't know if I'll need to, and that's a sort of weird thing to reconcile with. Does that make any sense?
It does. I also was in foster care for a short while, and then I got adopted. So I definitely feel you because when I first met my biological mom, I remember like vividly like her saying like, you're not gay, are you? And I'm like, that's such a weird question to ask. Like, like it wasn't the first thing, but it was one of the main things that I remember because it kind of took me off guard, because like that's the thing you're worried about, and it's like, okay, like I know that I can't reach that, that place because you have those walls up and you wouldn't accept that. And it's a sad thing, like it's a sad reality, but it happens and stuff, so I definitely feel you. Yeah.
I also I have this like vivid memory of my father sitting me and my sister down and being like, so like once you finish university, you're gonna find a man and you're gonna get married and have sex. And I'm like, are we? Is that what we're supposed to do? And I'm like, but why? Why would you want to do that? So it was things like that happening
Hmm.
in my mind as a child.
Yeah, you had mentioned like dismantling like that belief system behind like, the anti-LGBT rhetoric. And your families and stuff, and I wanted to see if anybody else had like any, stories about how you overcame that, if there was any prejudice towards the LGBT community, and how you became like comfortable with yourself and your identity.
I think for me, by the time I realized I was asexual, for me, it was more of a relief,
Mhm.
because I mean, I came at it as ace. I was 31, and I'd already kind of gone to uni and say, okay, well, maybe I'll find who I'm supposed to find out here. Went back home and, maybe I'm supposed to find somebody now. No, came over here. Maybe I'm supposed to find somebody. It was not happening. I was like, okay, well, maybe it must be me, you know? And so by the time I came across asexuality and then, aromanticism, I was just like, okay, I'm not broken. All right. That was like I hadn't even thought that until it hit me. And then literally that was my first thought. I'm not broken. Um, so it was actually a relief. Um, but, and then also at that time, I had friends who, growing up originally in church, I didn't have any gay friends or anything like that. Once I went out to uni, then, then I started to meet people like that. And then I started to kind of dismantle that. So that kind of happened before I realized I was asexual. So kind of half the battle was already gone. Um, and so, yeah, it was just kind of continuing on from that, realizing that, yes, I can be uh, queer and a Christian, despite, all of, despite all of that, and yeah, I definitely, I didn't tell my mom for about 5 years. I was too scared to, and it helped that I didn't. It helped that we were in different countries. Um, but I think when I do distinctly remember having a conversation with her where she just came out and asked me if I was gay, only because she'd been hearing rumors, and people were basically had rumors because they never saw me with anyone, and in Bermuda that kind of means that you're secretly having sex with someone because everyone has to be having sex with somebody, you know. And so because and in Bermuda, if you're secretly having sex with someone, it's usually someone of the same gender. That's how that worked. So those were the kind of rumors that I would get. Um, so yeah, but I growing up in Bermuda, because we're very close to the US, I grew up in that whole kiss dating goodbye era. So it's like, no, you shouldn't date, you should only court, you should only just go and get married, don't do anything else. So and I thought, okay, well, why is that difficult? you know, like Sade, I was just like, okay, fine, if that happens, that happens. Um, but yeah, that's just a weird thing. But yeah, it was definitely something that I came to terms with before I came out as asexual. And then after I came out as asexual, even more so advocating for that. And now I'm a lot more vocal about it than I was before.
Could you remind me of what the question was? So I make sure that I'm like, sorry. It's like I
Um,
could build on what Melissa was saying, but could you also remind me of what the specific question was?
oh yeah, it was just like, how did you dismantle like the anti-LGBT rhetoric like that was around you growing up, or like, yeah, just
I mean, I think I was quite fortunate again. I mean, there really wasn't
mhm,
any. I mean, my immediate family are like not very religious. I mean, we're like gently Roman Catholic, like maybe midnight mass like once a year. But other than that, like we weren't churchgoers, like we weren't praying at home or anything like that. My primary school was a Church of England school, but aside from knowing the Lord's Prayer off by heart and knowing a lot of Bible stories and having stained glass windows, it really wasn't making that much of a difference. And, my area that I live in Reading, like I wasn't really around many people that were like particularly religious. I mean, and I kind of discovered or started working out that I was asexual when I was like 11. And at that point, I really wasn't, kids weren't really religious. So people weren't talking about that. So it didn't really, wasn't something I really took into consideration at that time. And by the time I went to secondary school, it was sort of like a, or at least in the circles I was in, the black kids didn't really hang out with me anyway. So I was mainly just hanging out with a bunch of artsy emo kids who were just like listening to Bring Me the Horizon and had like the flippy hair and was reading Kerrang magazine. And no one like, and we had like Demi Borgir on the front cover, like it wasn't a religious environment. And it was more of like a very Tumblr era. So everyone, well, I personally wasn't on Tumblr, but it was pretty cool to know like the kind of niche orientations. And it was no girls' school, so everyone was like a little bi anyway. I started going to Pride when I was like 14. And so it really wasn't like the kind of environment where religion held any relevance. I think it would have been strange to be religious in that environment. Like if there was someone who was like an avid churchgoer, like that would have been strange. There were some Muslims around, but they were probably the only people that were like actively religious. They weren't really very active Christians in my environment. So I think fortunately it wasn't something that I really had to unpack. I realized as I got older that there is an issue of like homophobia and queerphobia within the Black community, but it never really manifested in a blatant way because it just wasn't something that anyone talked about. So on the rare instances where someone would talk about it, which I've only really seen happen a handful of times, whenever it has happened, it goes downhill quickly. But that didn't happen very often. It was just like an unspoken thing. Like I realized this year, because it's kind of like the 50th anniversary of Pride was this year, and I've had more opportunities to meet like elders within the queer community. And I realized that it's only been like this year that I ever met Black queer people that were like over the age of 40. And it's like, it's not that, people were like, keep them away from us. It's just that they just weren't around. They weren't out. They weren't in those circles. And it just wasn't really spoken about. So the foundation that I had wasn't really like we're against it. It's just more like this isn't something that we just incorporate into our reality at all, which kind of made it something like I wasn't afraid to express any of that. But as I got older, I realized that it is a hurdle that you kind of have to tackle, especially when it comes to activism. And like, I feel, well, I know that in terms of my work, it's quite a rare occasion for me to get to work with Black people. Like I can say like 96% of everything I've ever done has been with white people. Those are the only people that are really interested in having these conversations so far. So there's still a lot of progress to be made there.
Definitely. Definitely.
I think with me, and I don't think I'm special in this regard, but as I said previously, it was definitely clear to me growing up that LGBT people weren't accepted in my biological family's household, but I don't know, because like my father would, you know, my father and my mom would say things that were outwardly homophobic, and in the back of my mind I was just kind of like, I don't get what the big deal is. Although I will say part of me, that part of that might have stemmed from the fact that in the back of my mind, I think for a long time I understood that I found women attractive, but I couldn't articulate it or say it out loud. But I don't know. I liked watching Sierra's videos a lot. I don't know if you know who that is, Sierra.
Yeah, she's famous. She's quite well known.
She's a great dancer, but I was also found her very attractive. I mean, I still find her very attractive. So maybe it was that, but like in the back of my mind, I was like, I don't get what the big deal is about. Because I remember like seeing like a news story on BBC News about gay marriage, and my dad was like, this is crazy, this is weird, and I'm like, I didn't say it, but I was like, it's actually not. But and then I think the sort of big shift came when I went to sixth form, and then two of my closest friends during sixth form were openly gay, and I was like, oh wow, gay people in the flesh. And then so I think one of them made a comment to me about because I was never like homophobic, but then at the same time I was still sort of learning things. And then I think I said something along the lines of, I kind of just assume everyone is straight until they say so. And then they said, oh, you can't just assume everyone's sexuality. And it just set something off in my head that went, actually, you can't, because you don't know. And then you also sort of don't have to know, because it wouldn't be a problem either way. And then that was just kind of the first moment where I was like, no, there's something else other than straight. There's bi people who are pansexual and things like that. And I think maybe it was that moment where I was just kind of like, it's not enough to just not be homophobic. You also have to actively acknowledge all the other people in the LGBT plus community and not be complacent or a co-sign or reinforce things that seek to repress their equal rights and discrimination and things like that. So that was like a turning point for me. So it was dealing with that, but then also still going to church and still being confronted with a lot of sort of open anti-LGBT plus rhetoric. And um, I mean, luckily for me, it never resulted in me attempting to, I guess, uh, change my views on other LGBT people, and again being for their rights to equality, because in my mind there's no ground, no amount of scripture that makes it okay to not be in favor of it. But I think for a brief period during university, when I was with another church group specifically, for whatever reason, discussions about, again, demonizing sexuality, demonizing LGBT people, for whatever reason, that resulted in a lot of personal shame. And it did at times lead to me, I'm ashamed to admit this, sitting up at night and just like praying to God that, like, why am I not straight? Like, why does this feel wrong? Like, um, can I be changed? Because I have been to sermons where they were actively preaching to people like sexuality is something you can change. You just need to pray harder. And so I was like, can, can you? Well, I'd be praying and I'd be like, oh, but can I change? Like, is this something I can change so I can stop feeling ashamed, so that I can stop feeling like I can't show up as my whole self when I go visit my foster mom? Can I change so that, I don't know, so that I feel normal? But that it was always more of a something that I internalized for myself, and not something that came outward. But like, I mean, I stopped that quickly once I realized it didn't work. And then also just because I'm like, well, if you buy into the idea that you can change sexuality with prayer, are you not simply invalidating every other queer person that you've ever met, basically, or just queer people in general? So I was like, okay, that's enough of that. But uh, yeah, um, but again, there's still an aspect of listening and learning, because um, I, I, you're you make up one letter in like the alphabet crew. Can I say the alphabet crew?
Yeah.
I like that.
You make up one letter, and you know, you do sort of have to uh, take a step back and listen to when other people have concerns, because we're all just kind of squished into this community, which is non-straight, non-cisgender, and we're not all the same. But it does help to sort of be receptive to other concerns that are outside of your experiences, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So I'm gonna skip me on this topic. If you know me, I talk about this all the time. So we're gonna get right into the audience questions, and one of the first questions is, do you think that your white friends can overdo their support? As the sole black friend in my group, I sometimes feel fetishized by my white friends. So does anybody want to talk about if they feel their white friends can overdo their support, and if you feel fetishized?
Um, I mean, it kind of depends. When we say overdo their support, do we mean like support for like our asexuality, or like support for like, I don't know, being anti-racist or being inclusive? I think one thing that I found, I mean, it's not really in terms of my friends, but I guess just some people I've been around, like in like my workspaces and in the ace community. I particularly kind of like white liberal spaces. There's this there is a sort of think what the right word. I guess it's sort of like a sort of entitlement. There is actually an element of sort of overdoing it, overstepping. Um, that I do tend to find like I've noticed it sort of recently, like with the queen dying. I've seen like a lot of white liberal people be very adamant about how black people should react to it and how angry we should be and how oppressed we should or shouldn't feel about it. And also like within sort of queer spaces and a spaces, you kind of get people who feel like because they are already part of a minority group and that they feel like they're educated and they feel like they sort of have a sort of get out of jail free card, that they don't really have to check themselves as often as they would check someone that seems to be associated with like another political stance or a different orientation. And consequently, their attempts to be helpful isn't actually something that they've put much thought into, and it is quite performative and quite reactionary, and it isn't actually very helpful at all. And it's in those instances that I just kind of feel like, overdoing it or just not actually doing anything that's genuinely helpful, and there's kind of like a lack of conversation about what actually is helpful. And they also tend not to react very well when you say, actually, that's not helpful, and you're actually sort of overstepping there. um so that is something I noticed isn't really sort of, and I wouldn't say fetishization, but there's an element of tokenization, which I think is something that you also feel. I mean, I've definitely felt kind of used as sort of like a diversity symbol within various communities by the same people who are very, very silent when I call them out for racist behaviors or racism that exists. They're quite quiet about that, but at the same time, they want to kind of highlight how our communities are so inclusive by using me as an example. Um, so yeah, it's less fetishization and yeah, and just kind of more of a sort of tokenism that I think that well-meaning left-wing white communities tend to do.
I think for myself, I'm I'm more of a introverted person, so I keep my group quite small. Um, but yeah, like I said, a lot of times I've been the only white person in the group. I tend to be the only Bermudian, so I tend to have it's more me being from somewhere else rather than uh, being black. Although in more recent years, I've had a lot more conversations with people about what it means to be black in this, in this culture, in this community now. And I think that for my group of friends, it's just something that they just haven't considered. So it's not like they're actively uh, fetishizing me or tokenizing me, but they are kind of coming out of that idea of being colorblind. That was the one thing that I had to uh, that I really fought against, is people talking about, oh, I'm colorblind, I don't see it. No, 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 no. Um, that's the For me, that's the thing that I really had to kind of pull people up on, is no, don't be colorblind. See my color. Um, as someone who really struggles to see themselves as part of the Black community just because, I'm a geek, I'm ace, I'm, this and that. Um, don't take me any more out of there, see me for who I am.
Um, I'm not sure. So the question was about sort of overdoing allyship. Is that it?
Yeah.
Um, I I'm not sure. I think when it, I feel like for me personally, when it comes to my active participation in spaces like these, for instance, or anything where I actively participate in sort of activist initiatives and things like that, I sort of do it by my own means, and maybe part of that is deliberate because I have quite a few non-black friends, and maybe the idea of inviting them to have a dialogue with me about those initiatives feels like extra labor on my part, and it's not deliberate. It's just that I'm very much about just doing the work and hoping that it gets through to other people. Um, but I think that maybe a thing with my friends is also I try and make it as clear as possible to them that I cannot nor will I ever be your token black friend. I can't do it. Um I will make sure that if I can see that maybe you have blind spots in certain areas, I will speak up on that. But I'm also sort of annoyed with myself in this regard, just because I'm annoyed about the fact that those sentiments are quite recent sentiments that I've had, just because I think I've spent a long time ignoring the part of myself that is bothered if I do see or hear things from my non-black friends or acquaintances that bothers me, and because of that I've been in quite a few situations where they've said or asserted something that sounds ignorant, and because I'm the only black person around, I either don't want to, I'm trying to keep the peace, or I don't have the energy. And then also, maybe one of the few instances where I did sort of speak up and make my voice heard, I was quickly shut down, and no one sort of came to my defense. And I think it was that fear that sort of made me not want to say anything for a long, long time, and up until 2020. And again, I'm annoyed with myself because of that. I'm annoyed with myself because 2020 was a shit show, and I'm like, I hate that it took that incident, as it were, for everyone to just sort of pay attention, because it surprised the fuck out of me to know that certain people didn't know what Black Lives Matter was until 2020. And I'm like, I've been hearing about Black Lives Matter since like 2013. So I don't know where you lot been. um, I think half the work of advocating for marginalized groups is sort of demystifying ourselves and saying, I'm not an alien or a unicorn, but I do have experiences that are present outside of your field of life experience. And what you can do to affirm that is to listen, to be open to learning, and things like that. But don't talk over me. And also with fetishization, I also don't. I think maybe there's a not a glamourization. Uh, there's a thing whereby maybe sort of people who aren't part of those marginalized groups sort of make them seem a bit more exciting, or I don't know. They make it into something that feels a bit more like it's I don't know, entertainment in a way, to entertainment, as opposed to me just saying, hey, racism happens, I'm often on the receiving end of it. What do you think you can do to maybe tackle that, or to change your mind, or to influence the minds of others around you? Also, because you might be in a place of privilege where you can have an impact on that, as opposed to maybe restricting your view of what it's like for other people to maybe the media that you consume, because sometimes it maybe feels like non-black people, people who aren't part of certain marginalized groups, think maybe because I don't know, maybe because you watched Black Panther, or you watched The Hate You Give, or something like that, that you now know everything there is to know. And it's like, well, have you spoken to any of the black people in your life that are actually experiencing it in real time, and that you can't just watch a piece of fictional media? Or I mean, a lot of these pieces of media are influenced by real life events, but anyway, you can't just watch a piece of media and rightfully so empathize with it, and then think that that's all that you need to do, or think listening is all that you need to do. I mean, are you in a household where you hear racist rhetoric happening, and you've never said anything or made it a point to confront that? Like, what are you doing in the day to day? Because it's more than just being friends with a black person or a queer person. It's more than just listening and taking it in. It's like there's active work that needs to be done. And I think a lot of people don't want to step beyond the bounds of, I have a black friend, I've seen 12 Years a Slave. I'm like, I don't, just,
Yeah,
where's the effort is what I'm asking.
right. And to go off of that, I wanted to get to another question, real quick. And then that question is, what are some unique parts about the Black A-Spec experience, um, that outside those outside of it would likely won't be aware of, but should definitely know about? Some pros and cons. I'm sorry, I think I read that wrong, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, to answer quite succinctly, given the limited time that we're already running over, I think for me, I think one of the most unique parts of the Black Aspect experience that people outside of it wouldn't know is that you, or at least in my case, I've never really felt like I fit within this community either. As it was sort of touched upon earlier, you're kind of like the odd one out. Wherever you go, you're always like a minority within a minority. And the second I discovered the ace community, the first thing I noticed was how white it was. And I knew that that couldn't be entirely unintentional. Like, this is how the community's chosen to represent itself. This is who people relate to the most. This is who's most likely to identify as asexual. And this is who's most likely to be uplifted and amplified. And I still feel that, and I have encountered a lot of racism within this community. And even now, as an activist, I try and step back from it as much as possible, literally outside of doing the work. And I don't think that that's something that people really consider because, as I mentioned before, if you're within a minority group, especially if you're white, you kind of feel like you don't really need to try as hard. And we're very happy to talk about issues within the wider queer community all the time. But we all know that there's a progress flag for a reason because the wider queer community has a racism problem and the ace community is not immune to that either. So I feel like that's a kind of unique part of the experience. But also, I think there's a positive parts of the experience is that you can kind of just by being openly Black and asexual, I think it makes a good impact on other Black ace people out there. In fact, I think it makes more of an impact to be doing that visibly because it is countering the image that has been projected for a really long time, and it counteracts, this whitewashing that the community has. So I think that there is an even added sense of power that comes with that.
I think you're on mute. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I was coughing. I think for me, one of the things that I really found about the Black experience is there's still a lot of hypersexuality in the Black community, and that's both inside and outside of the Black community. It's a stereotype that's put on us, but for most people, since it kind of fits their, it fits their use, they're very happy to use it as long as it, works for them. But in then, perpetuating that stereotype, that's where I found a lot of difficulty fitting into the Black experience, is this hypersexuality and the way that the hypersexuality is shown. I mean, you just have to look at Carnival to see it, and yeah, it's there's that, and then there's also the really searching for a lot of Black people are on this constant search for their history. Where did I come from? Where do I fit in? What brought me to this point? And for me, being asexual, that's been another thing of, okay, where do I fit in this diaspora? Whereas even we look back to a lot of African, being from the West Indies, from the Caribbean, looking at a lot of African cultures. Okay, do I fit there? Do I fit there? Do I fit there? It's constantly in the back of your mind. That search is constantly on, of where do I come from? What's my true history that's been lost? That I'm trying to reclaim.
Sorry, I'm just self-conscious about the last time I answered the question. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I think one thing that sort of comes to mind is I think for me personally, I haven't really been in a lot of spaces that are specifically centered on asexual people, and that might just be because I've got social anxiety, so I don't always go out a lot. But and just knowing where to find those spaces. There's luckily a lot of online spaces as well. It's funny actually. I barely use Facebook, but when I do go on the occasions that I am on there, I'm seeing other events that I can go to, or friend groups that I can join to make friends, just to try and put myself out there a bit more. And I think I came across 2 ACE groups that I joined. Asked to join, I went in there and then I scrolled through the membership, and there was not a drop of melanin in sight. I was like, what's going on here? Where are the Negroes? um, so yeah. I think the other thing is I because I don't go out a lot. I mean, I spend a lot of time on YouTube, and I watch a lot of Black like social commentators, and a couple of them in particular speak on representation of Black people in media and how Black people are received. Uh, I guess if if we're talking about like the UK or in the US and things like that, and they were just talking about how like the most hypersexualized images of Black people are the ones that are pushed, and then when there are sort of more reserved or just not overtly sexual images of Black people in media, they either don't get as much shine. I think with music specifically, they don't get as much shine, or they're made to feel like you're just not going to get traction if people don't find you shaggable or whatever. I think maybe there's this issue with Black female sexuality in particular, where it's like I can't, not me, but like maybe I think there's this unfortunate sort of sentiment for when Black women are promoted in minor media. It's this sentiment of I need to see you as a sexual being first before I see your humanity. I think that's very obvious in like female rap and things like that, because it's like the women who aren't overtly sexual exist. People keep trying to say they don't exist. Like it's like they're there, they just don't get a massive budget put behind them. And then it's no exception for the men either, whether we're talking about rap or we're talking just about um, media in general, that will jump at the chance to hypersexualize and hypersexualize them, often in the name of this is what masculinity looks like. So let's sexualize them first before we can have any instance of them like doing other regular shit that humans do. And it's like we'll do that with the Black people first because we unfortunately hold a lot of value towards their sexuality before we hold any value towards them doing anything else, which feels like a sad truth that is seen in our history and representation. And what else? It's a layered history, I think, and I think it's getting better, but maybe there just needs to be a wider push. I think it ties into fetishization, and I think all of that compounding on itself, because if it's representation for other Black people to view as well, maybe they're then put in a position where they're like, how do I confront the fact that I might be asexual if all my life, all I've ever been told is that this is a normal part of your humanity and it's a normal part of your Blackness to either be hypersexual or at least actively seeking out or engaging in sexual activity, if that makes any sense. That was all quite jumbled, but I hope it makes some sense. Um,
Okay.
sorry, what was it again?
No, it was no, I forgot. It was just talking about the Black AIDS experience. But
Right.
so for now, yeah, we're gonna have to wrap up and get to the next panels on the schedule. So it was nice talking to you all. If anybody has any questions, you can also ask in the Discord. We could go answer questions there. Um, but so far, this is all the time we had today. It was lovely talking to each of you and getting the experience of Black asexual women. And yes, so is there anything else that we need to go over before we wrap this up?
No, if you're looking for me on Discord, my Discord name is Cami, but I've added my name in brackets, so you can find me if you're looking for me.
Yeah, and if you need to find me, all my ats are at the Alton Benoit. Probably won't be on the Discord because I got to be in Serbia on Monday and I have some things to sort out. But thanks a lot for tuning in.
Yes. Excited.
Um, I just thank you for giving me the platform and then for inviting me. I've uh, found this a very good experience. Thanks.
Yes. Okay, so the next panel should be Autistic Aces, I believe. So everybody go tune in there and keep the celebration going. And I hope you all have an amazing day. And as I say on my YouTube channel, I love you all platonically. So I will see you all. All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.